Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of ServerPress Office Hours. Today is really going to be very cool because we have the smart people in the room. So we've got, although Greg's pretty smart too.
Yeah.
I am outnumbered by smart people. Let's just put it that way. Today we're going to be talking about a few things. Steve's going to be talking about a couple of really cool things that he's been doing with Desktop Server. And then we're going to turn it over to Dave where he's going to talk about some of the stuff that's going on with WP Site Sync. Before we get started, however, as you can see on the podcast, there is a live chat. Feel free to ask questions. I will try to see them all and ask Steve and Dave the questions. Probably going to wait until after some of the demos are done before I ask the questions. If you feel like I missed your question, please feel free to type it again. Sometimes things scroll by very quickly. I have old eyes and an old brain, and sometimes I miss things. So I won't be offended if you repeat yourself. I am not ignoring you. I just sometimes don't see things. There are a couple other housekeeping things I want to get out of the way, which is essentially this is a community broadcast, which means we try to support each other. So that means please, please, please be civil and respectful. We are all human beings behind the keyboards doing the best we can. If someone asks a question and you know the answer, feel free to jump in and type the answer and be helpful. That's how community works, and that's what we like about WordPress, and that's what we like about ServerPress. And the last but not least, if any of these rules aren't followed, we reserve the right to boot people. I have never once had to boot a single person from the broadcast, and hopefully today won't be the first day. Although I do see Adam Silver on, so I don't know. Might be
all bets are off.
Yeah, all bets are off. So,
hey Adam.
Hey Adam. So I see we have people from Hawaii in here, which I was just there a couple weeks ago and almost didn't come back. And so welcome to the show. I am Mark Benzicane. Hi. I am the operations guy here at ServerPress and the one who tends to talk a lot. So I'll reserve that for later. And then let's go around the room and everyone introduce yourself. On my screen, Steve is to the left, so let's go from left to right. Steve.
Yeah, I'm Steve.
Wow.
That was great.
Yeah, so I program Desktop Server and write a number of extensions along with the rest of the crew. And yeah, ServerPress is our home. My home.
And Greg?
I'm Greg Franklin, and I'm responsible for most of the support. You'll probably be talking to me if you run into any issues. Just ask me anything. I'm pretty knowledgeable with both Desktop Server and WP Site Sync.
And Dave?
I'm Dave. I'm the other programmer, and I work mostly on WP Site Sync, but also chip in on Desktop Server with design time plugins and some of the core stuff once in a while.
Great. All right. So, hi Ken. Hi Paul. Hi. Oh, Adam still again. Welcome to the show. Let's get into things. Steve, you've been working on something. Tell us about it.
Yeah, you know, my landscape is kind of changed in terms of the way that I work with WordPress. Microsoft has come back to my life. Yeah, I changed editors. You know, I was using Atom for a while. I was using PHP Storm, but now it looks like Visual Studio has captured my heart. So those that are not familiar with IDEs, integrated development environments, basically what we have is a product from Microsoft, their flagship editor, if you will, which is Visual Studio Code, is now pushing PHP and is my main editor for editing everything WordPress. So I can't remember the last time I touched Visual Studio. I think it was I haven't touched it since WordPress. Since I jumped on the open source bandwagon and kind of just left Microsoft and started working with just WordPress-centric tools that really catered to PHP. But now Microsoft has gotten back into the game. You know, they acquired GitHub, which makes the Atom editor. They put a lot of work into Visual Studio Code, which uses the same technology based on Electron, and they put together a really nice, slick editor and made it free. You know, and I remember back when Visual Studio was a pretty penny. So it's really exciting to see this open source code out there and for anybody to use, and it's great. So yeah, I've been working with Visual Studio, and I've got some cool little tools that plug in for a desktop server that allow you to work with Visual Studio Code a lot easier. So yeah.
Now, Steve, why would someone want to use something like Visual Studio, which sounds pretty advanced, over something like Notepad++ or like a very basic editor?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question, because when it comes to just editing, you want something that's fast and quick and easy. And Visual Studio Code doesn't disappoint in that regard. It is a fast and easy editor. It loads up quick. You can edit your files. But it goes beyond that. With a IDE, which is a different class of editor, you're getting a lot of features like, well, for one, Microsoft came up with Intellisense. They were the first ones to come up with this technology. What it is, it's the ability to give you hints while you're writing code. So if you jump into your code files in Notepad or any typical text editor, it's not intelligent. It's dumb. It just shows you your text file. You can edit it, and that's basically it. Whereas with Visual Studio, not only will you be able to edit your file, but it'll also give you hints on syntax. And, you know, it's kind of like a grammar checker for coders as well.
So if I were just a new developer or designer out of the gate and getting started, is it terribly complicated to get going with Visual Studio? You know, normally we recommend that people start out with something that they can grow into, but onboarding can sometimes be a little complicated or confusing, and so is Visual Studio a little bit hard to onboard, or is it pretty easy to just get going right out of the gate?
Well, you know, it maintains the same look and feel that that I remember Visual Studio. So it may look intimidating for a user that's not familiar with all the menus and all the windows that pop up, but you have your basic main editor window, and then you've got your all your files. So your files are on one side, and your editor is on the other, and you can easily jump between files. You don't have to, you know, click File Open. You can just literally click on each of your individual files in your project, and it just pops up in the editor. So from my perspective, once you get over the hurdle of seeing a new layout, it's a lot easier to work with. It'll definitely, you know, make your workflow a lot more productive than a traditional text editor.
Cool. All right. Well, so what does that have to do with Desktop Server? Let's have you show us. Show us what you've been working on.
All right. Well, I've got a prepared video, actually. So one of your first questions was how hard is it to get started with Visual Studio? And let me see if I can share my screen here.
I may have to share, allow you to. Let's see.
Okay.
And this is what happens when you go a long time without doing it in office hours. You forget some of the technical things.
Well, it's just Google Hangout. Let's take a look here. Looks like I can only share screen, but that's good enough. Let me go ahead and click on share.
There we go.
Okay. And so if you're on
Mark, I think if you select Steve, then
yeah, I need to make him the presenter, correct?
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
I'll edit this out in the final production. No, I won't.
So let's take a look here. The great thing about Visual Studio is it's cross-platform. One of the things that made Visual Studio maybe a little bit more difficult for everyone to adopt was that it, was originally a Windows-only product. And now you can load it up on Linux, you can load it up on Mac, you can load it up on Windows, of course. But it's a great editor regardless of which platform you're on. So to get started, you want to visit code.visualstudio.com. And once that loads up, you just hit the download button. And the web page is going to take you to whichever platform you're on. So we downloaded the Mac version here. And on Windows, you'll just go ahead and run the installer. It installs like any other Windows application. And on Mac, it's just as easy as dragging it from your download folder right into your applications folder. And there it is, just dragging on into applications. And you can find it right in your applications folder. And just double click it. And it's going to want to get verified. Open it up. Yep, came from visualstudio.com. And that's it. Once it opens up, it's pretty basic. There's a getting started that you can read if you're into reading documentation, but it's pretty straightforward. But the first thing you want to do when you load up Visual Studio is go to your extensions folder, because extensions, Visual Studio was originally designed for like C++ and later was ported to allow you to edit Visual Basic and a whole plethora of other languages. And PHP was kind of the most one of the most recent languages that Visual Studio came about. So if you go to extensions, there's a number of plugins, just like Atom has a bunch of plugins, if you're familiar with that editor. Visual Studio has a huge library of plugins. So the PHP extension pack is the one that you're going to want to look for if you're a WordPress or PHP developer. And that's the one that's written by Felix Becker. And you just go ahead and click install on that guy. What that's going to do is it's going to install Visual Studio's PHP debugger and Intellisense. Now, Intellisense is what I was talking about earlier that allows you to type ahead and actually see suggestions, kind of like a grammar checker for code that's specific to PHP. And that's it. So what I've been working on is an extension to Desktop Server to allow you to create a Visual Studio Code workspace. One of the things that the editor does is it creates a little file or folder with a number of files in it that allows you to configure this environment specifically for your particular project. In our case, we work with WordPress projects, right? So we want to have Visual Studio work with WordPress right out of the box. And that's what this plugin does. If you go to Desktop Server, you can, let's see, we'll jump over to the video here and see the installation. There's a plugin called Visual Studio Code Support. And you can get that right on GitHub. Let me see if I got the URL for that. We can show you the URL here shortly. But basically, you install this plugin and start up Desktop Server. Once we fire it up, you'll see it on the main screen. We'll start at Desktop Server, click Next, type in a password, and there we are right there. So if we scroll down, you have a number of plugins. Of course, we've always supported Dreamweaver as a code editor for theme designers. But now we've got this one at the very bottom, which is Visual Studio Code. And what that's going to do is anytime you create a WordPress website, where you import a WordPress website or copy or move one, or if you have an existing WordPress project inside Desktop Server, it'll automatically give you a Visual Studio Code workspace so that you can get started in Visual Studio Code right away. And so, for instance, let's jump forward. And we can see there's our Visual Studio. We create a WordPress website. I'm just going to jump through here real quick. Create a WordPress website. Boom. Next. Do a typical installation. We're all familiar with this, right? You guys are so quiet.
Watching.
There we go. So there's our WordPress website. Now, when you're working with Desktop Server, we're already familiar with when you create a WordPress website. You've got the Sites button enabled now, and you click that, or you can just go ahead and visit localhost on your web browser. See localhost right there. And now you're going to see a new button on your localhost page. And it says VS Code, right next to Visit Website, Dashboard, and your DSCLI, of course, or database. Click on the VS Code button, and boom, we'll see Visual Studio Code fire up. It'll drop you right into your project. So right there, you can see our example. And all your files, the index, all that good stuff.
So it makes it a lot easier than opening up your file manager or whatever and then navigating to it and opening it up in whatever your text editor is. It's just a matter of clicking on your localhost page and boom, you're in, and you've got this fully functional IDE right there in front of you to be able to do everything that you need to do from a code standpoint.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, one of the cool things that Visual Studio has in it is not only is it a text editor, but it also has your command line built into it. So the first time you fire up Visual Studio and you visit the command line, you do have a little bit of configuration here. It's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is hit New Terminal. And right there, you'll see that we're in the Desktop Server command line, the DSCLI. Now, you'll get this notification that pops up. And what that does is it shows you the environment variables that create the terminal. So if you're not familiar with the terminal, I'll show you here in just 1 second. All you have to remember is just to click Allow. So for this instance of this terminal here, we're going to allow Desktop Server to configure itself inside of Visual Studio. This doesn't affect your terminal if you're a terminal user or command line interface user. Just so you know, your command line interface isn't affected outside of this instance of Visual Studio. But basically, what that allows you to do is it gives you access to the environment. So we're in our WordPress folder on the command line. And from here, we can type WP to get access to WP CLI. And you'll see it pop up here. Oh, first you have to close the terminal after accepting. We'll go ahead and reopen it here.
Is that also true on Windows machines, or is that just something that is specific?
Yeah, it's true. What's great about this is that Windows has PowerShell. It doesn't actually have a proper command line interface that you would see on a Unix system or a Linux system that most hosting providers have. Now, Microsoft is making progress in adopting that, but if you use this plugin in Desktop Server, it automatically configures Visual Studio to use the Bash command line. So you've got your WordPress CLI there, you've got Composer, you've got access to all your familiar tools right there within Windows. And yeah, to answer your question, Mark, you do have to click Allow to allow this instance of your command line to work.
Okay. So
and you only have to do that once.
Mm-hmm.
Once it fires up, you can see now we have access to WP CLI, all the functionality that's there.
Now, is that once per development site, or is that once period?
I believe that's per this particular instance of the development site, yeah. So you'll see that alert message right away.
Mm-hmm.
All you do is click Allow, and now that instance has got access to the command line.
Okay. Okay.
So you got Composer that's in there as well. If you're a PHP unit kind of guy, you've got access to that as well. And see, a lot of people aren't familiar with DSCLI, but it's packed with all sorts of functionality. You also have the Node engine that's in there if you do any type of CSS manipulation using Node, or the package manager, NPM. And these are versions that are on long-term support. So they're not the latest versions of Node or the latest versions of Git, but they're the versions that are most supported by the community at this time. Now, if you do Git on Mac, if you don't have Git installed, it's going to ask you to install it. If you're on Windows, you're not going to get this. You automatically get it. So this is all advanced stuff for people that are familiar with actual coding development in WordPress. This is one of the conveniences of Visual Studio. But I can show you the editor here in just a minute. So that's going to install Git. Well, it takes a few seconds, depending on your speed. And there we got Git. So there's your typical editor. And one of the cool things that I can show you is you can set up breakpoint. But we can get into debugging. In just a sec. But yeah, that's what I've been working on.
That's pretty cool. Now, I'm just curious if you could like give an example or show an example of maybe how the Intellisense works. I think that's one of the really super powerful features of something like this, as opposed to just a plain vanilla text editor.
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Let's take a look here. So if I jump
also did we mention Git?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just looking at the Git command line there.
Awesome.
So we actually already have this guy set up. Click on my sites button, and I'll do this live. Click on Studio. Boom, right in our file there. So there's all our WordPress files. If you're a theme developer, you'll see the WP content folder, the plugins folder, your themes. And let me scroll down, index. This is where the magic happens. So if I'm working along and I'm writing code, say for instance, I'm doing some JSON editing, you can see how the Intellisense automatically pops up the library of functionality that PHP has, and I can just select it and hit enter, and it'll finish writing the code for me. So above and beyond a typical text editor like Notepad, you're going to get an editor that gives you hints and allows you to type ahead. And it gives you parameters, tells you what the PHP functions mean. For instance, JSON underscore encode returns JSON representation of a value. So if you're a programmer that's familiar with JSON or you're working with JSON, this is going to give you some hints as to how to work with it in PHP. That's what Intellisense is all about.
And it's really helpful to people like me who get into code about once every 6 months. And sometimes I might forget things like brackets and parentheses and things like that. And this really helps with making sure I get, I stay on top of that. So the syntax is very helpful. The hints that it gives me with the syntax. It's actually quite a time saver.
Yeah,
that's basically its forte. There's a thing called code folding, which a lot of people use, a lot of programmers use. It's the ability to actually roll up blocks of code. So if you've got long blocks of code, like for instance, code that's within an if statement, you can just click this this little tree button here and it'll roll it up. You do the same thing for comments. Say these comments are kind of in your way with your code and taking up your screen, you just go ahead and click it and it'll roll it up. If you roll over there with your mouse, you can go ahead and just hit it again and it'll expand. So this is something that you won't see in a typical text editor. Code folding is really dependent on the language that you're working in. Now, Visual Studio, like I said, didn't really support PHP until the last, I guess, decade. But it's been around for decades. So it's really a pleasure to see all this functionality, working with PHP in a nice text editor like Visual Studio.
And I'm sorry. And like you said, this was something that Microsoft used to charge big bucks for.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's completely free.
Yeah, and it's come a long way in terms of all the functionality and how smooth and quick it is, and the features that you get. You get this little preview window over here too that allows you to scroll through a thumbnail version of all your code.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got pages and pages of code, some theme designers, they have lots and lots of things that they have in their mind that they're juggling. This allows you to jump through these pages quickly and easily.
And is there Intellisense for WordPress functions?
There are a number of additional extensions that I've seen people using. And right now we're kind of wading through which ones are the best. And when that time comes, we'll go ahead and integrate that into this plugin so that you can get even more functionality. So I'd love to hear back from users as to what extensions they're using in their versions of Visual Studio. Any existing Visual Studio Code users out there, yeah, let us know, and we'll pop them right in there.
Yeah, it looks like Ken Kramer, who's one of our longtime favorite customers, he says that he uses, I think he said that he uses Visual Studio. So we do have some customers out there that use it. And he did just ask a question, and he wants to know if it will open a second tab on a second site, or will a second instance of Visual Studio Code be fired up?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't even tested that.
I had a feeling that would be your answer.
Yeah. We literally wrote this plugin like last night. So we've...
That's not true. You've been working on this for a little bit longer than that.
I've been working with Visual Studio for a while now, and I've been doing this manually. So it's kind of a pleasure to have a more refined process to just have this done right out of the box. So I'm going to create another website, a sample one, to answer this question.
We're all going to find out together. And by the way, this plugin that Steve created for Desktop Server, this is a free plugin that is going to be available. We'll be sending out an email to everybody with a link to the code, and it can be placed in your DS plugins directory and works with both the limited and the premium versions of Desktop Server.
It looks like Ken gave me an answer. He said install WordPress coding standards.
Ah, that sounds like a good one.
There you go.
Okay, so if we go back to our list of localhost sites, we now see two. If I click on our Visual Studio Code, we get another window with another instance. Now, you can obviously go to any window that you choose and click on File, Open Workspace to add an additional workspace. You're going to find those workspace files in a hidden folder on .vs code. So this is kind of important to know, because if you're on Windows, it's explicit, it's obvious. You'll see this .vs code that's there. But if you're on Mac, dot folder names are hidden. And there's a magic key that you can press on your Macintosh to toggle back and forth between that. So for instance, let's go back to our sample.dev website. And if I go ahead and list the view, we'll see there's a number of files that are kind of grayed out there. We can't see the .vs code. But if you press Shift Command period on your Finder window, let's do that. You can see I can toggle between hidden files and non-hidden files. So that's something that Macintosh users might not be familiar with. Just press Shift Command period, and that'll show your hidden files. And what we're interested in is the Visual Studio workspace file. Double-clicking that takes us to our Visual Studio and pops us into that project. On Windows, you don't have to worry about it. That folder is really visible. But for new users, it's just so convenient just to click the VS Code button. That just takes you right there.
Very cool. I think you just convinced me to switch my code editor.
So I'm wondering if you can combine workspaces. I'm not sure how that actually works. Looks like you can drag them around. I see. Yeah. So we can go ahead and add folders. And there's a difference between add folder to workspace.
And open workspace.
Yeah, interesting. So I hope that answers his question. I'd be interested as to what his preference is.
Yeah, Ken, what is your preference? Do you prefer that it opens in a window on its own or in a adds to the current workspace? Welcome, Various. Nice of you to join us. Okay, well, I think that's all pretty cool. And then before we get into anything else, I'm just kind of curious, Steve, if you want to fill us in on what other things you've got on tap for desktop server.
That's a good question. What don't we have?
I ask only good questions.
We've got a lot of things going on right now. But yeah, this is pretty much taking up my time currently. But it's nice to have a working debugger that allows us to develop code, not just for desktop server, but for all of our other extensions and plugins that we write. Yeah. Did I evade your question?
A little bit. So, like, I know that one of the a couple of things that you're focusing on also is some search replace improvements and deployment improvements and things like that, which have been something you've been working on. So, how I thought maybe you'd talk a little bit about, some of the challenges you might be running into with some of that and where we're going with it.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see a lot of functionality that's come about within the last couple of years in the WordPress community, and incorporating that into desktop server. So you mentioned search and replace. One of the things that desktop server has is when you import or export a site, you can perform a search and replace dynamically. And whether we're exporting a file for a hosting provider, we have this little feature down here called customized scrubbing options. And traditionally, this feature has been slow. It's written in a proprietary language. We're not utilizing some of the community code that has been proven to be optimized and fast, namely WP search and replace. So let's jump back over to Visual Studio Code here. If I fire up my terminal, I have access to the WP CLI. And one of the features in WP CLI that you'll see is a database feature called search and replace. So let me go to WP DB, and we can see that there is a search and replace option. And this has always been pretty fast, pretty optimized. So we're tying this functionality into the back end of what is customized scrubbing options, which has always been nice and convenient, but like I said, it's been traditionally slow. We want to see WP CLI being used, the technology being used as the back end. And of course, with the same nice, easy user interface, you can go ahead and edit your search and replace options, limit it within the database or within files, but basically drive this functionality as our back end. So we end up with a faster, more robust desktop server in the end. Part of that is overhauling this user interface. So that's just technology that's we've been trying to catch up with, and that's what we've been working on.
Yeah, I know that we're excited for that to come along because many people may not know this about Steve, but Steve is very, very much about improving the speed on everything. And so this is just one area because I guess we all kind of feel like when we can help you with some more efficient time management because things are working fast, it saves you time. And so Steve is always looking at how can he make things run faster and faster. And so I know that this is something that Steve's been kind of anxious to get implemented into the core of desktop server. Ken, by the way, says creating a desktop server workspace, he prefers a new tab.
A new tab. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Gotcha.
So that may be something that you want to throw into the next update on the plugin. So.
Yeah, I know we have other plans for the localhost page and the ability to customize these buttons and have it do, basically things that help you with your workflow. So feedback like that's really essential, and it's something that's nice to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we definitely love to hear and get feedback from our customers. We get several suggestions a week, and most of them are, I would say most 99% of them are very constructive. So we really appreciate that. All right. Let's see. Various is asking if there's a way in the DS API to customize the localhost homepage through a desktop server plugin.
Yeah, the desktop server API is not something that a lot of people are familiar with, but it is something that is completely open. So anyone can write a plugin for a desktop server. And when you want to write a plugin, you have the ability to customize quite a bit, including the localhost page. So the page that you see when you visit localhost can be fully customized with the desktop server plugin. So yeah, I guess we can show him some code if he's interested. Let's take a look here. What is the easiest plugin that we have for the users to get started
on? I don't know. Airplane mode, is that pretty easy?
Airplane mode is pretty cool. And I know that Norcross has been updating that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
There's the admin color bar.
Oh,
that's pretty easy.
That's pretty easy too.
Cool.
So every WordPress desktop server plugin follows the same API as a WordPress plugin. So if you're familiar with how to write a WordPress plugin, then congratulations, you're already on your way to writing a desktop server plugin. The difference between a WordPress plugin and a desktop server plugin is when you drop a plugin inside the desktop server plugins folder, it's available across all of your WordPress websites. Whether you don't have to go and install that plugin in the individual sites. And that's only true for design time. Only when you're working within desktop server is that functionality available. So to answer Varys' question about the localhost page, there is a special file that separates a desktop server plugin from a WordPress plugin, and that's the prepend file. So we'll find that let's take a look at one that modifies the page here. So
Clean Import probably does.
Yeah, Clean Import does, or Visual Studio Code plugin does.
Oh yeah, there you go.
So we've got the prepend.php file. Prepend.php is really powerful because it is literally a file that gets included with the PHP processor, the engine, before anything else. So you can really go to town and do anything that you want. So if we open this file up, and I can actually open it up in Visual Studio. We can see there's a global variable called DS runtime. And it's within that variable that we can perform all sorts of magic. If you go down and you make sure that there's a user agent and you're looking for specific events, you can use a method called addAction. And that gives you access to all sorts of events that the localhost page throws, so that you can inject your own code and customize the look. We're going to post on our website or somewhere online the API to the desktop server plugin. And I'm sure we already have an API that's out there. I don't know the URL off the top of my head, but we should make it available after this broadcast.
And it's probably really old.
Yeah. I seem to remember a document that you wrote a long time ago, but it's probably due for an update.
So if you wanted to customize a localhost page and you're interested in what events get thrown here, you can visit the index.php in the htdocs folder that's a part of your desktop server installation. So if you're on Mac, that's going to be under Applications, XAMPP, htdocs. And if you're on Windows, it's going to be under your C drive, XAMPP Lite, htdocs. And you can find that and locate the index.php. I have it right here in Visual Studio. And you can see some of the events that get thrown there. So for instance, domain button group gets thrown. And there's a domain button group after that gets thrown. And you can write your own action handler, just like you write an action handler for a WordPress plugin, so that you can add your own buttons and do all sorts of cool stuff.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Various says that is exactly what he's been looking for. And
I have the link, but I'm not exactly sure how to put it into this chat because it doesn't let you put in links.
Yeah. So we'll add it afterwards in the comments on the video. Once this is done, it will get produced to YouTube and it'll be in our YouTube channel. And then we'll be able to update some of it with links and things like that. Hi, I hope I'm pronouncing it. Your name is pronounced Eugen, but you might still be Eugene. So if I got it wrong, I apologize. But he is asking if there is an option to use desktop server with GitHub.
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I'm not quite clear on the question. How to use it with GitHub? Pretty much, it's desktop server is it does provide the DSCLI, and if we take a quick peek over there, you can see there's a DSCLI button. There's also the one in Visual Studio I just mentioned. This is available on Desktop Server Limited and Premium. Takes you right into your project, and you do have access to Git. So the Git client, from the command line point of view, has an extensive amount of documentation, more documentation than I can talk about in this Hangout. But
we'll be here all week.
Yeah, for sure.
You can talk to GitHub using this Git client, or the command line rather, Git. I use a client. I cheat. I use Tower. But a lot of people use different types of Git clients to communicate to GitHub. But yeah, certainly you can use desktop server with Git and GitHub. That's something that we do all the time. We publish all of our plugins. The plugin for the Visual Studio Code is available on GitHub, and I think that is public now. Let's go ahead and take a quick look. Let's see here. That's going to be under GitHub and ServerPress / Visual Studio Code Support. Yeah, great. It is public. And that's an example of where we publish our desktop server plugins.
So Eugene, if that answered your question, great. If not, feel free to correct us, and we'll be happy to revisit. Looks like the only other, this is probably the most serious question of the day that you'll get from Adam Silver, so it's going to be extremely serious. Why did Steve shave the Gutenbeard?
Oh, yeah. Because it's summer. And it's gray.
So there you go.
Yeah, I'm missing it. I might come back. We'll see.
Well, Steve is clearly, you know, the best looking of all of us, so he could do it either way. So, um, okay, I think that's the last of the questions, maybe for desktop server, or if anyone has more questions about desktop server, please feel free to put them in. But um, I think right now it may be Dave's turn to talk a little bit about some of the stuff he's doing. So I'm going to click on his. Let's see. There we go. Do we have Dave? There we
It says
go.
I'm presenting. I
All
don't know that
right.
you need to do that, but
Well, I did it anyway.
okay.
So, hey, Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be
Hey,
here.
good. Actually, yeah, the last time I saw Dave, his beard was longer too, I think. So,
I tried to clean it up a little bit.
yeah, we talk to each other every day, but we actually have video off. This is the first time some of us have seen each other in a while too.
Hey, hi, you look great, guys.
Oh, yeah. You all look great. Um, so, Dave, you've been doing some WP SiteSync stuff, right?
I have, yes.
Yeah. What have you been up to? I know we put out a couple of plugins in the last couple of weeks, a couple of extensions for WP SiteSync, and
We have.
thought you could talk a little bit about that and maybe talk about some of the things you've got on tap as well.
Okay. We'll start with the new add-ons. We did a WP SiteSync for Gutenberg blocks. The core WP SiteSync plugin does work with all of the core WordPress Gutenberg blocks. So if you're doing work with images and saved posts or saved blocks, that kind of thing, the core WP SiteSync works with all of that. And most Gutenberg blocks don't refer to any images, so those things will move between your source site and your target site with no problem. But we noticed that some of the Gutenberg add-ons were doing some things with images, and they're storing the image IDs, and we need to manipulate all that when we do a post. So we went through and we found the more popular Gutenberg add-ons that have several thousand installs, and we're doing some of these things. And we wrote a plugin that will handle all those images and the save posts and other references that those blocks are creating, and translate all that data from the source site to the target site. So you can use WP SiteSync with the Gutenberg add-on to work with all of your favorite Gutenberg blocks. So that was a lot of fun to work on. Learned a lot about Gutenberg. Learned a lot about the data manipulation for that. So that's working really well. We like that one. The other interesting new add-on is WP SiteSync for easy digital downloads. So now when you're working with your EDD products, the download products, you can move those between your source site and your target site. And it handles all the short codes. It understands product bundles and the simple products and all of that stuff. So we've got a lot of support in there for EDD now as well.
So going with the whole Gutenberg thing in general, including the blocks, what kind of challenges did you run into making WP SiteSync even compatible with Gutenberg? Because as we know, synchronizing Gutenberg blocks versus just synchronizing text can present its own set of roadblocks and challenges, and I'd be curious kind of what you had to what you had to deal with there.
The biggest thing was the data manipulation. Gutenberg stores all of the data right there in the content in little pieces of JSON data. And they have a parser built into Gutenberg that you can use to extract all the different blocks. But that gives you the blocks, not the JSON data that kind of delineates and marks each of those blocks. And that's the part that we have to update. So if you're referencing an image ID on your source site, that image ID can change when it gets over to the target site. So we need to change that data. And if we don't, then when you're on the target side, you want to edit that content again. Gutenberg kind of regenerates all of the HTML between those block markers. And if what it regenerates is different than what it originally had, it says, oh, there's a problem with the content, and we need to turn this into an HTML block or something like that. It has problems with that. And so learning how Gutenberg dealt with all that data and translating it correctly, that was the biggest challenge. And that took a little while.
Yeah. And did you find that there were challenges also once you figured all that out? Was it challenging to say create updates for, say, the pull extension and things like that? I mean, was pushing and pulling exactly the same as far as that went, or did you have to take special considerations for when you're pulling from a live server or something like that?
Well, fortunately, the way that the pull mechanism works, it essentially generates a push on the target site and then brings that down to the source site and pretends it's getting a push request on the source site. It's kind of weird and backwards, but that's what allows that to work. And as long as the push is working for Gutenberg, doing the pull, that's essentially riding on top of the push. So if the push works, then the pull will work.
I see. I see. And then when you moved into making these the Gutenberg blocks extension, which handles some of these third-party Gutenberg block editors, what kind of challenges did you have to overcome with that? Because you would think that with all these different editors out there, the way that they handle data would be different, and it would be, you know, out of the gate, when you put out this extension, it actually handled several different plugins, and I'm kind of curious how you were able to do that, considering that usually when we do plugins for third-party creators, the way that they manipulate data is all completely different. And so I was kind of surprised that you were able to handle so many at once.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. We started off by looking at the most popular Gutenberg add-on plugins, and I started looking at those, and I think we're supporting 5 or 6 or 7 different plugins. I forget now. Greg probably remembers. But I started looking at a couple of those, and I found that there's 5 or 6 or 7 different ways to manipulate that data, create all of the, you know, register, block type, and all of that stuff. It seemed like every plugin was doing it a different way. So just looking at their code and understanding it was fun. And so I started writing the first part of the plugin to work with, I think it was advanced Gutenberg blocks. And then I started writing the next section to work with the next plugin. And I'm seeing a lot of duplicated code. And I finally decided to just make it all data-driven. So now the only thing we really need to pay attention to is the piece of JSON data that's stored in those block markers. And all I need to know is this member of that JSON data block, is this referencing an image ID or a post ID or a taxonomy term, these kinds of things. So as long as I know what that name is and what kind of data it's pointing to, I can manipulate that on the source and the target sites. So I wrote some code to make it all data-driven. So now I'm just adding the property name and the property type to a list, and the plugin just goes through all that data looking for the things that it needs to work with, and it just ignores everything else.
Okay, so it cuts down on the brain damage that you have to go through when you have to do the updates and support another product, theoretically.
Right. Instead of writing new code for this plugin's image manipulation and then another block of code for this other plugin's image manipulation, I write one block of code so I don't have to retest everything when I want to add a new block type that it recognizes. So I ended up rewriting that code 3 times. Actually, I wrote it once, and then I made some changes to make it a little bit easier and cleaner, and then I decided just to scrap all of that and make it data-driven, so I didn't have to keep writing code. All I have to do is write data.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's amazing how much time you've spent. If you look at our original roadmap for WP Site Sync, Gutenberg wasn't even on it because we
It
didn't
didn't
know
exist.
about it. It didn't exist. And when the whole idea of Gutenberg was introduced, we kind of had to rewrite the roadmap, didn't you? And you had already been knee deep into a couple of other extensions that
Yeah.
that were uh, that were pretty close at the time. And all of a sudden, we had to kind of reshift our focus because we knew that when Gutenberg was an official release, WP SiteSync needed to just work with it.
Yeah. Our goal is to have WP SiteSync work with WordPress core.
Correct.
So when Gutenberg dropped and it was in WordPress core, we had to support it.
Yeah.
So it was. I think we had been looking at the plugin, the pre-release of Gutenberg for months and months, and working with that and getting familiar with things and making things work. But I think it was early December, the next to last drop of Gutenberg, just before they launched 5.0. I think that's when they added several new block types and the save posts and a couple of other things. And we had to scramble basically with this new release of Gutenberg and refactor a bunch of stuff and get things to work. And we still didn't release that. The WP SiteSync was kind of mostly working with Gutenberg on the 5.0 release. But there was a little bit of late night coding after 5.0 dropped.
And banging on keyboards.
Yeah, keyboards, walls, various things. It was a challenge to rework a bunch of things and make everything work correctly once Gutenberg dropped.
Yeah, and I remember where we went from the company line being, WP SiteSync is compatible with the latest version of Gutenberg, whatever version it was, to we got to make this thing compatible with Gutenberg because it was one day and then it wasn't the next, pretty much. And like you said, it's mostly compatible, but
it was, and that's just the nature of development.
Right.
When they're making stuff, and Gutenberg really, it was developed in a very short period of time, really, for all of what's in there and all of what it does and the thousands of lines of code in there. So I was expecting some last minute changes, just not to the extent that we got.
Right. Yeah, I think it took you a little bit by surprise, and I remember you must have consumed mass amounts of coffee at that time.
There was coffee involved.
Yeah, there almost always is. So then that kind of brings us to easy digital downloads, and this is kind of like two different extremes. The easy digital downloads, we have a very good working relationship with the folks over at Easy Digital Downloads, and I don't remember if they approached us or we approached them, but somehow or another we got to talking. It was at work. I do remember it was at WordCamp US a bit ago, and we got to talking, and they offered their full support for us to be able to build an extension that's compatible with Easy Digital Downloads. And so it's kind of another extreme where we haven't been presented with any surprises, because with that extension, we worked with them kind of every step of the way. They and maybe you can talk about that whole workflow process in case there's anybody else out there that would like a WP SiteSync extension and wants to know the nice way to work with us on it.
The nice way. That one actually went really, really smoothly. There were no surprises, and I think that's mostly because we sat down with the guys at EDD, Kyle in particular, and we started with the documentation. What is this plugin going to do? What are we expecting out of this thing? And then we wrote the specification for how are we going to implement this. And then from there, once everything was decided and mapped out and documented, this is what we're doing. I think I wrote the main part of that plugin in a weekend. And then Kyle on the EDD team, he actually started testing with us. And he would report issues and make suggestions. And so he was involved in the documentation phase, the development phase, the testing phase, every bit of it, every step of the way. And that's perfect for us. That's the dream, because with his very close involvement, we didn't run into any surprises. Everything went really smooth. He made some notes, and I remember he was concerned about a couple of things, and these were things that I was already familiar with, and we had documented in the specifications. This has to be handled, and this is how we're going to handle it. So yeah, everything went through pretty smooth on that. It was a very easy project compared to some other things we've worked on.
Right, and I would say that our experience, I think it's across the board with any software, but of course with us with Desktop Server and with WP SiteSync, our experience has always been kind of frustrating for developers when a product you support suddenly comes out with a new version, and they've totally changed everything up, and all of a sudden the product you have that works with their previous versions worked fine, and now it doesn't work at all, and it's Steve likes to use the term borked.
Yeah.
And so what we really liked about working with the folks at EDD is, as many people might be aware, they're working on a version 3.0. And since we were working closely with them, we know what to expect. And so the extension is actually designed kind of around what they call 3DD. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Dave, but
I'll jump in.
But it's kind of developed around that. So we know that it's not only compatible with the current working version of Easy Digital Downloads, but it will be compatible with the future version. And of course, that makes life easier for all of us as well.
For that specifically, the products themselves, the download products themselves in 3DD are not changing that much compared to the previous versions, the 2X versions. But a lot of the other things, part of the main development effort with 3DD is to put everything in custom database tables for performance reasons. And since WP SiteSync looks at all of that stuff when it's moving things from one point to another, that all has to be compatible. So to address that, the initial release of WP SiteSync for EDD is handling the products only. And that way, when 3DD drops, we can add the support for other things like reporting customers, purchase history, all of the other information, coupons, all of that stuff that's now not stored in the core WordPress tables, but are now in custom tables. So when we add support for that, it's going to be 3DD and above. You have to have version 3 or greater of EDD for this to work.
Right, and so it was very useful for us to be able to create the extension to know that what works now wasn't going to change, and that's why we were able to make it as functional as it is right now. And it's always helpful because, well, I mean, so with those two extensions which have been released in the last couple of weeks under your belt, what are you what's next on the list now that we've gotten Gutenberg out of the way? Are we back to the roadmap?
Yeah.
Okay.
In a word, yes.
Okay.
The roadmap, I think the next one that we're closest to releasing is Beaver Builder. Unfortunately, we've been having a lot of trouble with that one. Also, the data manipulation for that is rather extensive because Beaver Builder stores all of its data in serialized PHP metadata. And that's really tedious to work with. There's just a whole lot of data for each page, and it all has to get looked through and parsed out for image references, and then the images have to be moved over and all that. It's really, really tedious. And to make it a little bit more challenging, they keep coming up with new versions. And every time they do that, we have to make some small tweaks. And the Beaver Builder plugin stores data slightly different than the theme. And so having one plugin that's compatible with all of the different Beaver Builder flavors and the data that it works with and all of that changing as you're going forward, it's been a lot of work just keeping up with what's going on with their release cycles and trying to finish the code on our end. And then, it doesn't help when you have a distraction or a segue. We're going off on another tangent when you have to stop everything and support Gutenberg. So all of these things add to a slower release cycle than we would have liked. But after Beaver Builder, I believe the next thing in line is WooCommerce. And we're looking at the same exact problem. WooCommerce is coming up with a newer version that's also going to be storing all of its data in custom tables, again, for performance reasons. So that's going to require a lot of refactoring on what we already have for the WooCommerce product. So it seems like whenever we set something on the shelf to go look at something else, we have to come back to it, and then there are new releases, so we've got to do a bit of maintenance to get it back to a point where it was before we left it on the shelf for a while. So it's constant catch-up with these guys, and they're doing releases faster than we can do development, it seems.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard because unfortunately, because of the way that these database tables are written, you can't just write one WP site sync core and have it cover everything. You actually have to,
not really practical.
Yeah, well, it's not just not practical, but I don't think it's possible. Maybe I'm wrong, but anytime you have somebody new out of the gate, they're going to write things their own way. So we have to take that into consideration. And so with WooCommerce, which is going to be a fairly significant extension, and then Beaver Builder, there are some questions about some other site builders like Elementor and Divi and stuff like that. Where are we on working on some of those things?
We have some code written for Divi right now. I think, again, it's kind of old. Unfortunately, we need more programmers. Elementor, we don't have any code written for that yet. It is on our roadmap. I think that's Greg's favorite page builder. He really wants us to do that.
A lot of people ask for it.
I know. We just we need to get to it, and it's been a struggle keeping up with Gutenberg and all these other things, and then having to go back and fix things just for the new release of Beaver Builder or everything. It's a challenge to keep up with it. I need more coffee.
I'm writing a technical spec with some help, as suggested by you, Dave. So it's being worked on.
Yeah, we're in the documentation of the specification phase. So it is coming. It's just not here today.
Yeah, and then yet there's another company that is working closely with us that Dave and the folks over at Give have written technical spec for that. And so that will be another extension that we're working on. So I think that's everything that's on the plate right now, which is a pretty full plate.
Only 4 or 5 or 6 different things going on at once. That's all.
Yeah. But the important thing is one of them's not Gutenberg. So
not anymore. At least until the next version of WordPress and whatever changes we do for that. We might have to revisit that one in a couple months.
Yeah. And so Eugene is asking if Elementor is working already with WooCommerce, making desktop server compatible with Elementor is not going to work with Woo by default. Maybe I'm misreading. Desktop server would work with it just fine. It's the WP site sync that.
Right.
Yeah. So you're not going to have any issues with desktop server working. I don't know if you mistyped or if we misspoke or something, but desktop server won't have any problems with it. It's WP site sync that we need that WooCommerce extension in order to fully work with WooCommerce.
Right.
Yeah. So. Okay, so yeah, I think Eugene meant WP site sync. So
that's what he meant.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We're on the same page. That's awesome.
All clear.
Yeah. So that's I think that's where we're at with things, and I'm, if anyone has any other questions, especially for the developers who don't get to see the light of day that often, now's your chance to ask.
Yeah, since we're here.
And what's that? Yeah.
Since we're here. Yeah.
If not, I really appreciate you guys being on, taking time out of your development time, because there's always lots to do, and And if anyone has any further questions or anything or wants to follow up, please feel free to email us, and we'll be happy to respond to you, hopefully with the right answer. And this will be up online on our YouTube channel very soon afterwards. And if you want more content and want to know when we put up more content, feel free to subscribe to our channel. And I don't know what what Adam means by that. No bright light. Oh, so Adam is saying no bright lights, don't get them wet, and never feed them after midnight.
Yeah. Standard programmer cautions.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. Helpful as always.
I love the 80s.
What's that?
I said I love the 80s.
Yeah, the 80s are great. Wasn't that like Gizmo and
yeah, I think it was.
Gremlins? That's what it was. Gremlins.
Yeah, Gremlins. Yeah. The Gremlin's name was Gizmo.
Yeah. Gizmo was Gizmo before he was a gremlin, right?
Sure.
Or did he ever become? Anyway, totally irrelevant.
We're digressing big time.
Yeah. And now you see how our daily meetings go. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and we look forward to another office hours soon. So until then, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.